Hello everybody, thanks a lot for being here after lunch. And welcome to our first roundtable, first conceptual roundtable of our conference. Here we aim to have different panelists and touch upon some important questions which hopefully will guide us in our research and in our further research and in our upcoming debates in the conference. The title is, you might have seen in the program, Marine Social Sciences at the Crossroads, Why and How to Rethink the Blue Economy. So, my name is Irmak Ertör. I'm a political ecologist and a marine social scientist from Boğaziçi University, Istanbul, Turkey. And I will moderate this session. I will just present to you our panelists. And we will have 3 questions. Each will be answered in 2 or 3 minutes by each of the panelists. And then we will open the floor to you and to your questions and comments, of course. Okay. Here I have Maria Hadjimichael. She's a senior associate at the Cyprus Marine and Maritime Institute. Her research interests focus on the fields of the political ecology and governance of the commons, particularly the sea and coastline. Most relevant to this panel discussion is her work focusing on blue degrowth and the right to the sea. Then I have Jerneja Penca. She works at the Science and Research Center, COPER, where she is the head of the Mediterranean Institute for Environmental Studies. Her research relates to governance for sustainability, transnational environmental law, and structures for science policy interface. She currently serves as the lead author for the IPBES, Transformative Change Assessment, and MEDEC, as you might know, Water, Food, Energy Nexus Assessment. She's a member of the editorial board of the journal Sustainability Science as well. Then I have Maciej Kowalewski. He's a sociologist, UNESCO Chair for Social Sustainability at the University of Szczecin, chairholder. His research and teaching work are primarily in the domains of urban sociology, urban politics, and maritime studies. And finally, we have Marta Ballesteros. She's a researcher at the Spanish Institute of Oceanography in Spain. The institute is 114 years old, and she joined it this year. And well, it will be also an important information. She is the first marine social scientist ever in this institute. She's an expert in marine and fisheries governance, public policy, and stakeholder engagement. Marta is involved in scientific and advisory boards at the European and international levels, and she operates at the science policy interface to generate and deliver knowledge for action. So, now I'm going to ask you a couple of challenging questions, and our first question is, why is there an urgent need to rethink the blue economy? Why now? And how, through which theoretical lenses can it be done? First, we will give the floor to Maria.
Thank you. Hello from myself as well. I think the very simple answer to this is because it makes sense. Since the introduction of the blue growth strategy at the European level, we've seen like a very fast move towards exploiting the wealth of the ocean, as the European Commission stated in this strategy. Not long after it got introduced, the European Commission changed the blue growth strategy to a sustainable blue economy, which shows how marine social scientists managed to kind of create some cracks and say, wait, there's a few things that we need to discuss before we really dive deep into kind of exploiting the ocean. Of course, some might say that this change was only in the name rather than the actual objectives of the blue economy. So there's a lot of work that we need to do towards that. Now, I feel like, especially across the EU, most of the countries have established their marine spatial plans, and that kind of creates a feeling to most of the member states that, okay, we have our MSP in place, now we can start really exploiting, because the fact that we have the MSP and it has been approved, that creates like the feeling that what we're going to do, it's sustainable, which is not the case. Because at the moment, what the MSP does in reality is that it allows for exploiting spaces that before we were not very certain as to what processes we needed to follow to get those kind of licenses. Now the procedures are in place, so the exploitation part is easier. So it's very important for us to kind of step in and make sure that we stop and think as well, or create the conditions where a healthy debate takes place without those who are arguing for a more conservation approach to marine spatial planning are not termed as kind of the radicals of the discussion and the anti-development ones. And just about the theoretical lens that I tend to use is a political ecology one. So it's important to understand the blue economy, but also the MSP as a sort of political technology that enables activities at sea, and we need to discuss the preconditions, like the social, political, and economic structures that are in place and are driving the MSP. So.
Great, thank you very much. And yeah, shall I give you this one?
Yeah, thank you. So I think Maria gave a good background to the European level of governance, and I would complement that with a more global perspective, which is that in roughly in 2010, this concept of blue economy was launched with an agenda that was very much emancipatory. It was launched by the small island developing states as a way for them to say that there are equity issues in how marine resources are governed and how they should be exploited. And that those emancipatory questions have been a strong part of what blue economy was at its essence. But it was also very much an appeal for an innovation in the area of oceans, in the sense of let's try to do things differently than what we did on land. So if we keep in mind those two aspects of what blue economy is, it's time to rethink them because they haven't been working. For one, all environmental indicators, practically all of them, tell us that the environment is increasingly under pressure. We've got pollution from plastics, from heavy metals, from pesticides, from nutrient runoffs from agriculture. We have still overfishing, overexploitation of resources. We have strong appetites for seabed activities going on seabed, destruction of habitats. But then at the same time, we also have social indicators that aren't telling us the story of the sustainable economy at sea developing in a way that would benefit, on the one side, developing states, but it's also not benefiting coastal communities. In fact, the very fast progression and very fast exploitation of marine resources over the past 30 or so years has been very much going in the hands of the most powerful. So we see increasing concentration of capital and of course of profits in the hands of large corporations rather than local coastal communities. So very simply, the answer is to the question of why to talk about this, because it hasn't worked, and we know that this is then if we compare the status of what we have against what it should be, it is time to rethink it. And then part of your question was also what approaches to take, and I think that I can think of a number of approaches, and I think also this room probably combines them and brings them together. I think we can think about environmental justice, ecological economics, ethics, international law perspectives, so many different systems thinking, socio-ecological systems. All these perspectives can be combined in thinking about blue economy or sustainability at sea and oceans futures, and they would all very much agree that a fundamental change is needed. So even if we change the perspective, I think we come to a conclusion that it is time to say that things haven't been working. Thank you very much.
Yes, and I would add that to these changes also our needs to rethink some concepts, basic notions that we are referring to in our social maritime research. And time and space would be this kind of concept that we have to rethink in terms of defining the blue economy for the nowadays circumstances. I would say that the effects of the blue economy are much more than here and now, because we are mostly talking about the future and the future generations and the future political arrangements, but it's also changing our idea and our own notions of territory, or how we perceive the space and place. Because obviously the effects of the blue economy are not just local or regional, but they have the global impact. And this is also needed to think about the geopolitical dimension of the blue economy. Of course, all the branches of economy have their own cultural, political, environmental, technological intersections, but in case of the blue economy, I would say that this connection to this territorial idea as a part of the geopolitics is the most important. So we can sorry. I think we cannot imagine nations or communities fighting for the access to the forests, but we can easily give the example of nations fighting for the sea access and sea water territories. Even when we are thinking about local communities mentioned today in this fascinating lecture, we have to be very careful, because we see nowadays that tensions and the conflict between local communities are important part of this geopolitical arrangements. And we are nowadays in this new world that we have to think carefully about the consequences of the blue economy, also in terms of the geopolitical tensions.
So thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations for creating this space for collective thinking. I will just build on what has been said before and look a little bit to exogenous factors. And I will propose three that are triggering the urgency for rethinking blue economy. The first is increased uncertainty, the second is increased ambiguity, and the third is limited comprehension. Increased uncertainty, not need to mention global trends all over with multiple impacts, including rapid change. Increased ambiguity refers to the multiple, somehow competing views of how the systems work, how they relate to each other, what is their status. And this is fueled by the polarization that we see in the society. And just to illustrate that, nowadays it has become acceptable to say something like, my truth is. And the third one is limited comprehension. Even in a rich, data-rich, evidence-rich context like Europe, we have limited comprehension of the social systems. That means that we are hampered to manage, we are hampered to anticipate change, we are hampered to adapt to change. So the challenge, if we combine the four responses, is so huge that I suggest also a 3D lenses. Whatever is your framework, and again, we are political scientists, governance-driven bias, so I will suggest whatever your framework, look at your core elements. What is your unit of analysis? What are your variables? What is the relationship between your variables? This morning, there was this reference to community. What if my framework is blind to community and I am trying to rethink the blue economy? Perhaps this is something that needs also to be addressed. The second one is let's put an effort on cumulative knowledge. We have widespread evidence, I am sure across this room, on evidence that is not connected, and this cost initiative creates a great opportunity to put that evidence together at work. And the third one will be, and I hope to elaborate on that further, look for interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches.
Thanks a lot to each of you. So now we will have a second, a bit more complicated question for each of you and for ourselves as well to think about it. Since we are talking about to rethink blue economy, so how can it be done critically? And so that we can have also through which novel tools, which methodological, conceptual novel tools, and empirically, how can we assess more information with more novel tools as well, for advancing both marine social sciences and social science informed policy making linked to the blue economy. So, in other words, I would like to hear your thoughts. How would you assess the implications for science and the implications for policy and society with which methodological, conceptual, and empirical tools? Maria, first.
Thank you. I found this a very challenging question when Irmak sent this to us. So, thinking how to address it, I actually chose to kind of reverse the question a little bit. So, in my head, when I'm thinking about implications for science, I'm thinking about the science that is promoted through like the EU institutions, the EU funding mechanisms, the UN, and so on. Like we had the UN Ocean Decade Conference a few weeks ago, and the slogan for the Ocean Decade is the science we need for the ocean we want. But the ocean we want is not the same for everyone. So who's driving the science that's needed for the ocean and what kind of ocean we want? So that we never addressed that question, but there's a lot of funding going into producing specific type of science that's meant to drive the blue economy. And my concern here is that the science that is being promoted, it's a science that certain institutions or certain member states and so on feel that it's needed to create a notion of infinite wealth, if you like. So science that will create the techno-fixes to allow us to extract as much as we want from the ocean, which is not possible. So in a way, the implications for science, as I'm trying to reflect on this question, is that we need critical science and science that will ensure that we can understand our cumulative impacts on the ocean and on the socio-ecological kind of systems that depend on the ocean, which it's something that's not happening. And just as a quick example from my experience with marine spatial planning in Cyprus, I was in this conversation with one of the policymakers, one of the technocrats who's responsible for the marine spatial plan in Cyprus. And one of his concerns when the MSP plan was being created was that there was all these strategies that we would like to increase our aquaculture production, we would need to find more space for renewables and so on. And his concern was that in these strategies that the different departments had, there were no KPIs. So they could create this MSP plan, but they didn't know how much the different department wanted to produce from the ocean. And it's a valid concern because he's coming from the shipping industry, so he has a different type of thinking, and I found his comment very helpful. And
Can you just say what is a KPI after that?
it's an index as to where you are and where you want to go.
Key performance indicator.
And so when we had this discussion, I said, it's true, we could start using KPIs, and maybe that can also help us understand how much we can use the ocean for. So it's not enough to just think about what kind of KPIs we want to take a sector where we want it to be, but we can also maybe use that kind of tool, the KPIs, to know when to stop as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks. So how to think about it critically, I suppose how to not think about it critically is more of a challenging question for this room, I would say. But my own concern and my ambition is to, and I think also more of a challenge for science today is not how to think about it critically, but how to think about it critically and yet constructively. How to combine the approaches of criticism, of examining and challenging our assumptions and paradigms and structures and views and practices, and at the same time think about alternative pathways and think about the ways that can get us to those pathways and those ends. And I think that type of science is what's close to, that's what resonates with me, but I see it's also quite rare still. The challenge is huge, and no doubt it's important to challenge these assumptions, but then also to overcome them and try to become more actionable as well at the same time. So if I can add some parameters and some descriptions of the science we want, corresponding to the Ocean Decade ambition, it's definitely transdisciplinary science because it presents us with a much more comprehensive view of what we have and more capable of responding to the problems that we're facing, so that's definitely among them. And I suppose I've also been explicit about that it needs to be actionable. I know that's not necessarily an adjective that many would use because science is meant to be neutral, but there's a whole discussion that we can have about how science being neutral is again an assumption that can and should be challenged because it's not possible to do so. And then we have also some of the wisdoms coming out of research that such science needs to be very much participatory and pluralist, reflexive of its own practices, but also reflective of plural values. I think you, Marta, have alluded a little bit to that because there's no one truth, but there's also a lot of values that we need to integrate in the kind of science that we generate. And certainly integrative, so cognizant of the fact that different factors are interrelated among themselves. And I think a very courageous science these days is one that looks at the root of the causes that have driven us to the current crisis. And so looking at the root causes and underlying issues that have been generating these processes and pointing them and naming them with the language that is actually accurate, I think that's the type of science that we should be looking at and also combining it with critical. Yeah, all of that amounts to, I suppose, less of a silver bullet type of science, but one that we would associate.
Thank you very much, Jerneja. In the morning, we were asking Sven to the role of the science and the role of the community. So now it's our turn, and we are trying to respond to these challenging questions. Now, Maciej.
Yes, we know that science is not working only with facts, but also with imaginations and fantasies, that we are producing narratives also. And when we look critically at our work, we see that there is a lot of threats, warnings, discussing about the hazards, risks. So we are somehow enhancing the social fears about the future. Of course, this is needed because we see that the future is not in that bright colors, and we have to do a lot of efforts to be careful about how we are researching the current state and how we are predicting the future. But at the same time, politicians and some other environments outside of the science are dealing with the promises more than with the threats. So, for example, somebody is saying that the blue economy is the promise of the wealth country or the imperial aspirations of the particular regimes, and we are not so much critically involved in these kind of promises. We are, of course, critical for all the measures, so KPIs and the other indicators, methods we are using, discovering the threats and the hazards for the future. But at the same time, I think we should pay more attention to these promises developed by the politicians or publicists or any other. So I would say that our task for the future is to be more critically engaged, not only with threats, but the promises of the blue economy.
With the blue economy, as well as with marine spatial planning, the problem is they carry this air of neutrality and rationality that make them so appealing, in particular for policymaking. So that's quite a challenge. And it somehow enhances this danger of self-evident truth, like if X, then Y, and everything goes smoothly. So I guess that for us we have two challenges, and I am a pragmatist. I love knowledge for action too. So picking a little bit of what was said before, I will suggest two ideas, and the first one borrows on Marlowe's Kran's thoughts, and it's on topics, and the second one will go on methods. So on topics, perhaps science needs to highlight what has been hidden in plain sight. And Marluz was pointing to this not in my backyard phenomena that now looks like not in my backyard, but right at sea. So we reconcile somehow the values. We need renewable energy, it's great. I don't want it in my house, not in my town, but if you put at sea, that is perfectly fine, and we can live with that. So those are the kind of topics that perhaps we can join forces to bring up front, because we are being kind of opportunistic in our own values as society. And the other one, in terms of methods, it's just sharing experience that has been painful and rewarding. I've been chased by my colleagues that are expertise in data and marine spatial planning data to develop a data approach to governance and to bring a spatial and a space into governance in a way that is able to dialogue with them. And we have been fighting for 1.5 years on all the things that cannot be done, but we start to move forward. So this is also the kind of moving from our comfort zone. I know it's risky, but if we move an inch, it will be worthy, because if not, we lose the battle in that actionable knowledge that other disciplines are so ready to put at the table.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Finally, the final question to the panelists, and then we will continue with the discussion. So, if you proposed one thing for more sustainable and just blue economies and blue futures, what would it be? Maria, the floor is yours.
Well, I would go for the long term. I was battling whether I should go for a more realistic thing, or like whether I should think about the long term vision. And I think it was discussed a lot during the keynote lecture, which I found very important that we had this kind of keynote lecture, because it opens the floor for us to discuss also the more kind of idealists issues that we need to put on the table, and we need to start imagining what kind of future we can strive towards. So the one thing which is of course massive is that we do need to start thinking about the restructuring of the economic and political system. And as it was presented to us with the examples of small-scale fisheries, there are examples that exist, of course, at the smaller scale that we can learn from. And we've seen this through the work of Elinor Ostrom, but also slowly with the variety of theories linked to the commons about what those kind of communities can look like, and maybe how that can kind of scale up. But scaling up means that you're more affected by the political structures and the economic structures that exist. So without kind of also thinking about the impossible, if you like, which it is the restructuring of the economic and political system, then it will be very difficult to actually reach the goal of a just future. And of course the discussion around the narratives and what kind of narratives we can learn from a variety of communities across the world, and kind of share them with the broader society is important. I think one example that it was kind of very optimistic when it happened, and it gave some hope for the future, is during the European Blue Forum that took place in May last year. There was one panel discussion with the question, are we asking too much from the sea? And at the end there was a question, what kind of, which concept did you find more interesting? And the concept which the participants voted for was degrowth. And I guess it's because even if it is difficult to discuss about like changing, what do we need to do to kind of restructure the system, it does make sense. So there are ways to start thinking about things and moving forward within the broader kind of aspect as well.
Thanks a lot.
So if it's got to be one thing, I would pick collaboration, both collaboration in science, but also collaboration in blue economy as a practice. In science, because of the reasons that I outlined earlier, and I find it, and I'm not saying this just because it's a launch of our action, which is inherently a collaborative effort, but it is very appropriate. I really believe that both science and actions can be done in a much wiser, just and plural ways if they are done in a team and collaboration. Thank you.
I assume that we don't have to be realistic in that wish. So I would say that preventing the commodification of the coast, that would be something that I would point out, because I think it's too late to think about preventing commodification and depolitization of the sea itself, but it's still possible to think about preventing using coastline and the spatial arrangements in that area with the nation-state regulations. We are talking here not only about the cultural heritage of the coast itself, and not only about the landscape and how we are preventing the changes in the landscape for the future generation, but what I mean here is that this contact zone between the sea and the land, this is something that will help us to preserve the blue economy far away from this commodification capitalism system. Yeah, that would be.
I find it quite realistic, though, at least in one of these narratives that you were mentioning. So we will get more ideas from the audience as well, but we'll now have Marta's contribution.
I think that complex problems are multi-layered, and in this setting in which we have poorly defined policies at best, weak or limited evidence at best, we have to recognize that we cannot do this alone. And since natural scientists have been blind for so long to social science, let's not do that mistake ourselves. And I will use an illustrative example building on this morning talk, when there was this reference to a space and place. And when, for instance, we think about offshore wind farms, we tend to think, okay, you will displace fishers on that area, that space. And we think also about the increasing conflicts with other areas, many issues that are related to the social dimension. But in a really fruitful conversation with a natural scientist, he told me, we need to start using acoustic research to look at how these facilities change the behavior of the fish, not in that space, in that place. And I thought, okay, that is sense of belonging of the fish into that area. So cross-pollination with interdisciplinary research, of course, but it will give for another talk, transdisciplinary research, find me outside and I would love to talk about it, but at least cross-pollination with natural scientists will help us to reinforce the arguments, to expand the narratives, and to deliver actionable knowledge.
Thank you very much for these thought-provoking ideas and contributions. So now we're going to open the questions, open it to the audience. You can perhaps have some comments, questions, some contributions. You can also respond to these previous questions, or you can just add other important ones.
Presentation, and I have more provocative question for you. In my mind, social sciences are ideology. Because you belong, to the STEM communities, you are suggesting reconstruction of the maritime economy, of something else, etc. So we are behaving like other ideological communities. And my question is, what is your intellectual enemies in this struggle? Because somehow I see that you don't have such kind of enemies and you are just fighting with a straw man. Is it true or not? And another question is also concerned with the idea of global south in social sciences. Maybe you can also elaborate what will be connection of this rethinking new action with this global idea of changing how to say epistemic structure, how people should, in social sciences should reason. Thank you.
Would you like to raise the questions to one of the panelists or to all of them? Any preference?
Anything.
Okay, then I'm going to ask the panelists. So we already got the first challenging questions. Who would like to begin?
We divide.
Perhaps.
We'll tackle them separately in collaboration. Okay. Well, perhaps I would then just go for the first one. The way you framed it really convinces me. I am a social scientist. My background is in political science and international law. But I integrate and I collaborate with natural scientists, and I never really feel that we have some kind of a separate identity, because when we do science that is about a problem and it's about an issue and it's transdisciplinary, I think all these boundaries somehow blur. And I do get bothered a little bit when it's keeps being emphasized that we're social sciences and like social science. I do find it much more as a one unity in a way. So I myself have a little bit of discomfort addressing your question, which is just, I suppose, to give a little bit more weight to it and perhaps throw it to somebody else to answer. But I would emphasize that it's an important one, that actually we don't have an enemy within the sciences as such, and certainly not with natural sciences. And perhaps I think we don't have an enemy at all, because at the end of the day, you know, science is not a religion that needs to sort of dominate others. In fact, we're actively trying to fight against dominance of anything. So I don't think it's relevant to speak of enemies, but it's more that we, I suppose, want to be heard and taken on board as a factor for consideration.
Yes, I wouldn't say that redefining concepts is a part of the ideology, because we are redefining concepts almost all the time as the abstract notions. They need to find a proper reference. And I would give again the example of the communities, which are, in my opinion, romanticized in all the policy briefs, I would say. Because when we ask local communities, they never say that they are greedy sometimes, or they are the agents of the state, or they are the part of the free market, and they are not respecting the landscape and the natural resources. It happens. I'm not saying that this is the feature of the local communities, but it happens also. But when we take a look at the different policy briefs or the policies themselves, it is usually like this, that we worship local communities for no reason sometimes. I don't want to express my disbelief in local communities or something like that, but when we are talking about looking at our discipline critically and redefining concept, that is one of the examples. And I don't see this as a part of ideology, but yeah, it might be perceived like that.
If you want to,
I think just quick, because maybe, yeah, I'll just mention it because maybe it's a bit different. I mean, I think sometimes, and maybe that's me, of course, we shouldn't also be afraid to talk about, you know, politics sometimes. I mean, what we're going to do with the ocean and the blue economy, it is a political issue, and in that regard, yeah, there's some intellectual, if you like, ideological conflicts that are taking place, and I believe it's important to address them, and whether that's through kind of talking about the importance of ensuring social and environmental justice in kind of in various actions, then yeah, we shouldn't kind of be worried kind of express that. I think it's important to acknowledge the politics that occur at sea and at the coastline, because Maciej mentioned the coastline, and of course that's kind of a very a space where a lot of conflict takes place. So I would say usually when I discuss about the future of the sea in policy or kind of political tables and so on, usually the intellectual enemies, as you call them, you know, would usually be those who would argue that talking about environmental and social justice is not the rational thing to do. So, yeah, I wouldn't kind of direct kind of the label of an enemy to certain ideology or whatever, but it's when your kind of ideology is put down because it's not the dominant one at the time.
If I just may try to attempt to answer your second question, honoring that and if someone from the Global South or familiar with the Global South would like to respond, please do so. But if not, what I would say is, of course, the way we generate, share, and exchange knowledge and use the knowledge is completely context dependent. So, to the best of my knowledge, there are several attempts worldwide on this global north, global south, south-north, including ocean decade initiatives, but also the Marine Social Ecological Systems Conference that was organized in 2016 was mainly Western European centric. This year will take place in Asia, and there is a strong effort to bring those other countries together because we share many things. We do not share others, and the way in which we are addressing the blue economy topic could be a lovely issue for an international cost action once you are done with this one. So,
we have time for a couple of more questions. 1, 2. Okay.
There is one question from chat from Steve. How do you measure social and ecological impact related to blue economy? What are the components you compare? It is not said.
So, social and ecological impacts, and the last part was?
Yes, and what are the components? It is a methodological issue.
Okay, so anybody who wants to join in, to jump in. Marta?
well, social ecological systems are highly complex, and it will take to unpack all those components. And I will give you an example: the resource system, the actors, the governance system. So those are systems in itself, and in addition to that, you have the interdependencies on those systems and the interlinks on all those systems. So it's highly complex. Luckily enough, we have full disciplines focus on each of them, and we have plenty of mechanisms in terms of indicators and assessment frameworks that may help, perhaps not to measure all, but to measure some components. We would love to have the details and address the question more specifically, because I think it's impossible to give a comprehensive answer. But send the details, and we would love to point in the right direction according to the interest. Thank you.
Perhaps we can change. We can skip it next to the next question.
I would like to share some lessons learned by our research, or not on fishing community, but on islands community, addressing the blue economy. Allow me to say that I'm economist, maritime economist, so we, together with Yannis and George in the University of the Aegean, we tried to build, first of all, trust in the island communities, so to participate in our research regarding blue economy, because the biggest, the most heaviest constraint was the apathy and the reluctance towards research or their participation in local governance or local government. So we have some reluctance and some very much active, I could say, activists. So research, impact-driven research, in which in the first step they have already participated by rank public utilities. And then the second step was to present them the results together with some findings from literature review and experts. This triangle, I could say, persuade them to, and us together, to find conclusions, and also through Delphi methods, to have a bigger consensus. So this gave us the possibility to work on carrying capacity, which is a big issue, and of course, we are very proud to say that we have a consensus on cruise carrying capacity in Santorini Island, which is a major issue, and this was emerged through participatory methods, and also we realized a mobilization in case like islands for energy transition, in the case of Astipale, where Volkswagen tried to change the energy model, and it was the transportation that changed their perception, and also how to mobilize youth through working on this 3 steps method, I could say, and also by participation, but the final word is evidence-based trust, I could say. So this was the method, and of course, working bottom-up. And this is our lessons learned on the islands, which are small communities, exactly on the core of blue economy. So this is the way that we run. Thank you.
The Dedegrowth concept and it's becoming more and more trendy and popular as a terminology and concept. Maybe just some quick view about the connection of that small-scale fisheries, what we discussed this morning, and the growth concept. About the socio-economic influence from that concept. We shouldn't speak now about indicators, figures, but just your view, because maybe it's future for that small-scale fisheries. But from one side and from the other side, maybe the big scale fisheries will have, I don't know, maybe negative impacts and so on. Just some words, because the small-scale fisheries are not competitive on the market, and not just on the market, but also within the communities. We know very well about the migration and so on from that small places.
I will make a small comment on that, and then I would actually give the floor to Irmak, because I think degrowth and small-scale fisheries are the work that Irmak is doing a lot on, so it wouldn't be fair for me to comment a lot on. I mean, generally, degrowth is understood as the downscaling of consumption and production. So it's something that's quite simple. The elements around social metabolism or ecological metabolism comes in. So what's the effort in producing a certain resource, and so on. So the not being part of the market and not being able to give the value, like a very specific value on what you're producing or your contribution to society, that makes it easier for you to become excluded from society. So I guess that's also something that small-scale fishers have to deal with a lot. And I think we can see that a lot with the wider discussion of the European Commission and how the European Commission is trying to address the issue of like the disappearing of the small-scale fishing community, and how that's being addressed is primarily through discussions around reskilling and so on. So instead of trying to ensure that their occupation remains viable, the attempt is to actually reskill into something that could create more economic value. So I'll give the floor to Irmak, I think.
I might add a couple of things more. First of all, today in the morning we were also listening to small-scale fishery cooperatives, and when we think about degrowth and when we think about all of these interdisciplinary issues that we were considering within this discussion as well, degrowth considers both the laws of thermodynamics on the one hand, and at the same time has evolved together with social justice and ecological justice concerns, which came both from activist movements from the United States, black movements, and so on and so forth, and has evolved in line with social justice and ecological justice concerns theoretically as well. It became much more in line with this debate, let's say. So that's why, and coming back to small-scale fisheries and their struggles, let's say, lots of fisheries policies for decades have prioritized industrial fisheries. So that's why in one of these special issues that we co-edited together with Maria, there was one specific article focusing on Istanbul fishing cooperatives. There's an umbrella association representing 36 fishing cooperatives with 2,500 fisher members. So what they try to do is, in fact, discussing to some extent whether we should take fish as commodity or as food, and then how they do it in their own structures, in their own decision-making structures. Of course, they are not without contradictions or without challenges, but they are much closer to these degrowth debates, and part of their struggle comes closer to socio-ecological justice issues and degrowth as well. So that's why what fisheries policies have done so far, with or without different parts of, including different parts of science, is now something to be challenged, and with, there we need different approaches as well, both from social sciences and from natural science, let's say. One more question perhaps, and then close the session. There's one more.
Okay, we have one long question from chat. As scientists, the biggest problem we meet while working with stakeholders and trying to build trust among stakeholders is the reluctance of the official institution, their unwillingness, and to share their power and their failure to implement the decision taken or the management plans prepared. There is no trust anymore. We can go out into the field and face the fishermen. What are your views on solution to this issue?
Trust and unwillingness to collaborate in some cases.
No, sorry, don't let me the micro. I could go forever, so please go.
Okay, so I would just say that we know that there is a crisis of trust in science in general, and that's the part of the problem, I guess, because we are not talking only about the lack of trust in institutions, but also lack of trust in scientific knowledge, which of course are interconnected. They were so attempted to maybe go more to the local knowledge, but I guess it has failed. So now when we are trying to establish the trust between the stakeholders, I think we have to talk about the interests first. And when we are not revealing the interest of all these stakeholders, it is impossible to establish trust in the long-term perspective.
Marta?
No.
Okay. I will again use an illustration. Trust is not a stable thing. It moves. It's dynamic. And there is a really great graph by Steve Mackinson related to fisheries that just pictures how the trust between fishers and scientists have evolved through the years and the factors that are affecting that level of trust. But if we go away from fisheries and consider stakeholders and trust, any actor will be reluctant to give power. I want to hold the micro. I don't want to pass it. So if you put me in a position where we have to redefine the power that we have against the others, it will be challenging. The only way, at least, that we have found, again, Western, highly scientifically driven science and advisory systems, to do that is to try to systematically change the way in which we generate knowledge. So instead of doing that in ad hoc projects, like we have a great project, we do this, trust in me, we do great things, then what? That creates a lot of disappointment in communities. To start thinking on how we can embed that in the process. So it's not something that's from a project, great, or something that is from a particular initiative, but it's ingrained in the system. It will take a long, long process, but there are plenty, like 50 years of evidence on how this can be done. So let's put it at work step by step.
And on a somewhat different note, with that and linked with the blue economy, something that I feel that it's making this an increasing lack of trust also has to do with the fact that the policies are kind of conflicting and are difficult for communities or for the broader society to comprehend. And we are at the point now where the blue economy or economic growth and various activities are creating a situation where this fake dichotomy has been created between conservation and communities. So there's one example in Cyprus now where you have the government trying to create a Natura 2000 area in a certain space within a certain community, and 2 kilometers to the east there's the discussion about the creation of an industrial marine aquaculture harbor. So the same group of communities are against both of those. And I can understand why they don't trust neither science, because how can you create this Natura 2000 area with environmental NGOs claiming that it should have been a bigger Natura 2000 area, but the government is trying to shrink the boundaries so it can also include this marine aquaculture harbor within that space. So how do you convince these communities to accept the creation of the designation of that Natura 2000 area? They of course don't trust the government, so you have this fake dichotomy being created everywhere. So we need to also start addressing kind of these misunderstandings of science as well.
Okay, then I guess we have to finish, and thanks a lot to our panelists for this fruitful discussion and to the audience as well for these contributions and questions. Here we will stop. We have time until 5 for the poster session that will take place at the hotel.
Thank you. I think this was a fantastic roundtable. It was really interesting. So thank you the speakers, thank you Irmak who moderated. So now we continue the program at 5 in Hotel Kowalewski. So we can move as a group. We can gather slowly outside of the building and go there. And at 5 we start with the poster paper sessions. Thanks to all. Yeah.
The posters for tomorrow, you bring them today?
Yeah, you can bring everything today, yeah.